Hi everyone, today we're going to discuss the concurrent estates. Let's start by discussing the first concurrent estates. Let's anticipate that there are three. The first one is the joint tenancy. The joint tenancy has the characteristic of the right of survivorship. The right of survivorship happens when one joint tenant dies and her shares passes automatically to the surviving joint tenants. So the right of survivorship, which is the main feature of the joint tenancy, has to be present at the creation of the right of survivorship by express language. Because of the right of survivorship, the joint tenancy is neither divisible nor descendable, but it is alienable. And in case of alienation, the joint tenancy becomes a tenancy in common. Let's discuss the creation of the joint tenancy. The joint tenancy is created by the so-called 4 units. So the 4 units are required for the creation of the joint tenancy. The first unit is the time. Time means that the interest of each tenant has to vest at the same time. Because the interest has to vest at the same time, when one person already has ownership of a certain property, a joint tenancy cannot be created by that person. That's why we can discuss here the strawman conveyance. At common law, the owner, for example, of a fee simple absolute, could not convey to himself and another one as joint tenants because of the 4 units which are required for the creation of a joint tenancy. So instead, the requirement is satisfied by the use of a strawman, for example, a lawyer or an agent, who immediately conveys back to the owner the property after it has been conveyed to the strawman. This is to satisfy one of the 4 units in order to create a joint tenancy. The second unit which is required to create the joint tenancy is the title. Title means that each tenant must get title by the same instrument. Then interest. All interests in a joint tenancy must be equal, of equal shares. And finally, possession. Each tenant must have the right to possess the whole. As I was saying, you also need express right of survivorship, such as, for example, to A and B as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Now, let's discuss severance. So, how a joint tenancy is severed. So, the first possibility is by voluntary agreement. Second possibility is by court order division. It has to, we need to discuss here the possibility that the court severs the joint tenancy by partition in kind or by partition by forced sale. The partition in kind is possible only in a few circumstances, such as when the property can be divided physically. While the partition by forced sale, it's possible when, for example, dividing the property would substantially decrease the value of the same. Another possibility to sever the joint tenancy is the inter paribus conveyance, such as a sale. And a mortgage can also sever the joint tenancy, but only in those states where the title theory of mortgages is applied. Also by forced sale, and of course we are not going to reward one of the joint tenants for murdering the other one. Let's discuss now the second kind of concurrent estate, the tenancy by the entirety. The language used to create the tenancy by the entirety is to age and wife with right of survivorship. Husband and wife need to be the joint tenants. So in case of the tenancy by the entirety, for the creation of this interest, one of the requirements is valid marriage. Another requirement will be the 4 units, and the 4 units are the same of the joint tenancy. Of course, since a valid marriage is required in order to create a tenancy by the entirety, then a divorce would automatically sever a tenancy by the entirety. And finally, there is the tenancy in common. The tenancy in common is created by language such as to A and B as tenants in common, and it's presumed unless express language of right of survivorship is present. That's why it's very important to include express right of survivorship language in the joint tenancy, because otherwise a court would presume the creation of a tenancy in common. And for the creation of a tenancy in common, only one unity is required, which is the possession. Each tenant must have an equal right to possess the whole. And as I was saying, there is no right of survivorship, which is what differentiates the joint tenancy from the tenancy in common. Finally, we need to discuss the right and duties of the co-tenants. And we need to say that these rights and duties apply both to the joint tenancy, the tenancy by the entirety, and the tenancy in common. And the first right that we can discuss is the possession, which is for the entirety. So each co-tenant has the right to possess and enjoy the entire property. The duties of the co-tenants mainly to pay the costs, which need to be shared equally, such as taxes, mortgage, and repairs. But there is no right to contribution for the cost of improvements, except upon partition of the co-tenancy. Okay, so if you want to know more about real property, check out my other videos about present possessory interest, future interest, and many others. Thank you for watching, and bye everyone.